Each time we talk about the tanking meta in tier 11 and we look at the predictions I made before tier 11 came out so we can see if we fared up well or not. First of all, according to everybody's guess, including yours truly, the Prot Warrior was gonna suck this tier. And lo and behold, it did. The Prot Warrior absolutely sucks. The Prot Warrior is not only the least popular tank in the game, it is also the least tanky and, funnily enough, it has the least damage. If you take a look at the Archon right now, it is a perfect chart right here. The Prot Warrior is doing 25% less damage than the Blood Decay. As far as balance goes in DPS, that would be insane. Like, if a DPS class was doing 25% more damage than the second best, that would be something insane. Of course, people do not care nearly as much about tank DPS. I mean, it helps if your tank does damage. Of course, that is helpful to the raid, but it is not a huge aspect of it. The reason that the Prot Warrior is very bad and very unpopular is because the Prot Warrior is not nearly as tanky as everybody else, and that remained the case. Why is the Prot Warrior underperforming before everybody else? As we explained before, we get 434 balance in Classic, so that's the last patch of Cataclysm. The classes, the values were designed for every class to have their mastery values in tier 13 gear, so we were expected to have avoidance cap. We don't. Warriors and Paladins do not have the avoidance cap, and in turn, they are taking full damage every hit. Bears are not taking full damage every hit. They got their shield mechanic, they got their lethal attack power scaling. Death Knights are not taking full damage every hit. They got also their shield and heal mechanic with Death Strike, so those guys are not taking full damage, but Paladins and Warriors are. Except that the problem goes way beyond that. The reason that you see Prot Paladins and you never see Warriors is because Prot Paladins at least have 3 separate cooldowns that can reduce the percentage damage taken, not to mention Holy Shield, which is also going to increase the amount you block. But you have Ardent Defender, for example, that's a 20% damage reduction. At most, if you're timing your cooldowns right and if you're spreading them out, you can take at most 80% of the total damage in a hit. Of course, have you had full avoidance, if you get your mastery cap and you can have either a block or a dodge or a parry every single hit, which is basically tier 11, late tier 11 gear, you can hit it if you're like 372, for example. In that case, a Warrior or a Paladin is going to be taking at most 70% of every hit, because a block is 30% damage reduction, and if you block or dodge or parry every single hit, that's the most you can take. That's why they feel like they suck right now, because if you get unlucky and you get 2 full hits in a row, if you get a hit twice and it's not a block twice in a row, that can easily kill you. The Warrior has 2 lifelines to survive those full hits. One of them is shield block. Of course, if you pop shield block, you can guarantee that you're gonna block the next hit. The problem is that depending on the speed of the boss, or if you're fighting more than one target, that's the big one right there. The people tell me that the Warrior is an AoE tank. Oh, hell no. Until tier 12, they are anything but an AoE tank. You cannot have full uptime on shield block, and in turn, you are gonna take full damage you are guaranteed almost to take full damage if you're tanking more than one mob. And the only other lifeline they have is Shield Wall, which is 50% damage reduction, which is a nice cooldown. But if you compare it to the Paladin, for example, we have the same cooldown. That is Guardian of Ancient Kings is the same cooldown. That's the exact same thing. But then the Prot Paladin has Ardent Defender. The Prot Paladin also has Divine Protection to protect from spells, or if you don't take the glyph, you can even take more physical damage. The Prot Paladin has Holy Shield, which is going to make your blocks equivalent to critical blocks, that the Warrior can do critical blocks if you go over the mastery cap. But overall, the Paladin has 2 more cooldowns to survive that big damage, and the Warrior only has 1. So if the Warrior is taking a similar amount of damage than the Paladin, but the Paladin can use cooldowns to survive the bad parts of it, the Paladin is gonna be a lot more reliable. And that's why nobody wants a Prot Warrior, because even if the Warrior is playing well, and even if he has a good healer, there is always a chance that the Prot Warrior is gonna get destroyed because he gets 2 bad hits in a row. So the Paladin is third in the tier list, and I agree with that. This is one of the first cases where I agree with the tier list of the Archon here. So why is the Bear above the Paladin in the tier list? Let's talk about that. The Mastery of the Bear is a mechanic into which he gets a certain scaling of attack power, and that attack power turns into absorbing a next hit. Of course, that incentivizes them to not stack any other requirements. They do not have to stack mastery. So, for example, if you want to be a warrior or a paladin, you gotta stack your mastery to get your avoidance. And that's gonna come at the expense of stamina. But the bear can invest all his resources, all his gems, enchants, whatever, into taking stamina. So stamina of the bear is gonna be way higher than a paladin or a warrior because they do not have to meet any caps, any avoidance, anything. And all that stamina is gonna give them a lot more HP, of course, which is nice for a tank. But at the same time, that stamina is gonna give them more vengeance. The vengeance cap, you know, when you take damage, you get attack power. That increases the more stamina you have. So they are gonna get more attack power, which in turn is gonna give them more shields. Now, the scaling of this is not nearly as good as the scaling that a Prot Paladin can potentially get after tier 12. But we are not in tier 12, so right now the bear is essentially playing with a full kit as intended, and the paladin and the warrior are not. Also, and this is probably the biggest part for your casual guilds, even people that do normal or maybe heroics, you know, because DPS checks are a little tight in some fights, I call this problem the off-tank problem. You see, if you are a feral bear, you get a feral spec. And even if you are not a perfect cat, if you're never gonna be as good as a custom built cat, you can turn into a cat and do very decent damage. Now, if I am a Prot Paladin or a Prot Warrior or even a Blood Decay, because that's also a problem for them, and we are not taking damage, we don't do any damage to the boss. There is a lot of fights, for example Cho'Gall, where there is you need 2 tanks to do that fight, one for the ads, one for the boss, but there is like several 30-second intervals where there is no ads, so you're pretty much hitting the boss for very little damage because you're useless, there is nothing for you to do. If you are a bear in the middle of the fight, without respecking, without anything, you can turn into a cat and make use of those 30 seconds to help the DPS of the guild. And that's why feral tanks are so popular in hardcore and casual guilds. I think in casual guilds they are also popular because they use leather. They do not compete with the Blood Decay or the Paladin for the tanking gear. They use different types of armor, and that is more efficient. So even casual guilds that do not care too much about DPS are gonna benefit from a bear for the most time. Finally, the Blood Decay, of course, the elephant in the room. Why is it S tier? Everybody predicted the Blood Decay to kick butt this tier. That is not a shock by anybody. Let's start with the basics. The Blood Decay is insanely overtuned. Even in 4.3.4 back in Cataclysm, people were complaining that the Blood Dead Knight was super overtuned. They are in a similar situation than the bear because they can just start stacking stamina immediately, they do not need any mastery to function in theory. So from the bat, they are gonna be tankier nominally than the Paladin and the Warrior. Maybe not the bear because the bear has stamina stacking. They have some talents that multiply their stamina, but nominally, even looking at effective HP, a Blood Decay is gonna have more effective HP than a Paladin or a Warrior. The thing is that Death Strike, their main defensive ability, is a flat shield. Every time you do Death Strike, you get a certain amount of shield. It is also based on the damage that you take, so the more stamina you have, even if your mitigation is terrible, ironically, you're gonna heal more, the more terrible your mitigation is. So think about it. In tier 11, where your mitigation is the worst because you have no gear, that's when you're gonna get the most value out of your Death Strike. Every time you Death Strike, you get a shield and a heal. Also, the base values of Death Strike are really crazy. It's gotten to the point that the other day we were doing Alakir normal, and we were doing a 10-man, of course, and half the raid died, we had no healers, and the Death Knight killed the boss from the last 10% to 0 because he could heal faster than Alakir could hurt him. No other class in the game can come close to that, of course, that's insane. And sadly, I don't see that changing because, yes, even though they do not need to meet any criteria, any minimum amount of any stat to function, so you would assume they scale poorly, they don't, because they scale with damage taken. the higher the tier, the more damage the boss does, the more damage they are gonna heal off that damage that they take. They scale with stamina and mastery, so it is not like they are missing out on our mastery because paladins get blocked and they don't. As a matter of fact, all the tanking plate gear, it has strength and it has stamina. And it turns out that strength gives them parry rating, so even they are gonna get even more avoidance over time too. If I recall correctly, by tier 13, there were blood decays that were having like 35% parry rating or something insane like that, so it's not like they are gonna fall off, guys. I think the only reason that you don't think of blood decays as the kings of Dragon Soul is because protection paladins start scaling so well once they get like insane their mastery cap and they start getting a bunch of stamina on top of that. They reach a point where they can compete with the blood decay, but that's not gonna happen in a long time. So yeah, I think for the most part, this tier, if you're going blood decay and bear off tank, there is no way you can go wrong. If I didn't like the Prot Paladin, okay, if I were to just go for wall first, if I were to do super serious meta build, I will go for a Blood Decay main tank and a Bear off tank, and that's it. So far, the only thing that surprised me out of my predictions in tier 11 is that the Bear is a lot more popular than I expected. I always knew, I even made videos explaining to you guys that the Bear is really good, but the Bear was traditionally never popular in Cataclysm private servers, so I guess it's a wholesome kind of news in a way that people finally believe in the Bear. I don't know if I had that much influence on that happening, but I hope I did. Subscribe, leave a like, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.